Howdy, hi there, thrill seekers. Okay, there's new stuff on my blog and new stuff on my podcast. Go look at those things. All right, here's what I want to talk about, and I'm a little reluctant to talk about, but I prepared a little talk, so I'm going to talk about it. Tomorrow, there's some kind of a Buddhist forum, American Buddhist online forum, that's going to happen, and I've forgotten the name of it, and I'm too lazy to go look it up again, so it doesn't matter. But the keynote speaker for this online Buddhist forum is presenting a paper, part of which is kind of a hit piece about me. I mean, I don't know how else to characterize it. About a page and a half are spent sort of trashing me. And when I first read the paper, I thought that the author was just making stuff up because I couldn't remember having said anything like what is said that I've said in this paper. But the author provides like a, what do you call it, bibliography kind of thing at the end, citing sources with links to the actual articles on my blog that are cited in the paper. And I went and looked at those and I went, oh, I see what's going on. The author has paraphrased things that I've said in ways to make them sound different. Let's just put it that way. But if you want to go and do your own research and look at the things I've said, they're up there, and you can, anybody who happens to read the paper and wants to not be lazy and click through and see what I actually said can see what I actually said and see that it's pretty different from what the paper says I said. I thought about going point by point through the paper and kind of saying what it gets wrong about me, but when I did a little bit of preliminary work on that, I realized it would take a lot of work to do it, and it really wasn't worth it. But there is one point that I think is important enough that I want to be clear about my feelings about it, and that is the matter of collective karma. The author, who seems to be very fond of this idea of collective karma, says that I'm not enough of a scholar to understand the history of collective karma and why it's a real thing in Buddhism, blah, 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 but completely omits anything about why I take objection to the notion of collective karma. And the reason that I object to collective karma, I think, is something I explained fairly clearly in the paper that gets, or in the blog piece that gets cited in this paper. The idea of collective karma is, as near as I can figure in the way it's being used, is the idea that if the racial, ethnic, or national group that you are assigned to did something bad in the past, then you are personally responsible for those bad things that were done by your group. And that is a disgusting idea, and I reject it entirely. I always say that karma is something you should only point at yourself. And I'm referencing my dad's rule about toy guns. When I was a kid, we were allowed to have toy guns, but the rule was you couldn't point the toy gun at any person or living creature or an animal or something. And that's what I think of when I think of karma. If I talk about karma and the effects of my own actions and how they play out in my own past actions, how they play out in my life today, I only talk about myself. I never point to somebody else and say, oh, you must have done bad in your past, or your ancestors must have done bad things in the past, and that's why you're suffering today. I think that's not something that you should do. The concept of collective karma bothers me a lot, as I just said, and one of the reasons it bothers me is it's too much like the idea of the curse of Ham, which is a Christian notion. I'm going to read to you what the Wikipedia says about the curse of Ham. Here goes. The curse of Ham occurs in the book of Genesis, imposed by the patriarch Noah. It occurs in the context of Noah's drunkenness and is provoked by a shameful act perpetrated by Noah's son Ham, who saw the nakedness of his father. The story's original purpose might have been to justify the subjugation of the Canaanite people to the Israelites, but in later centuries the narrative was interpreted by some Christians and Jews as an explanation for black skin, as well as a justification for slavery of black people. And similarly, the Latter-day Saint movement used the curse of Ham to prevent the ordination of black men into its priesthood. And that's what Wikipedia says. And similarly, the idea of collective karma is used in India to justify the caste system and the treatment of the so-called untouchables. It's used in Japan to justify mistreatment of the Burakumin people, who are descendants of people who did butchering for a living, which was considered to be a sinful way of life, not right living, not right livelihood by the Buddhists, and so they treat the Burakumin people even today very badly because of this. And that's why I don't like the idea of collective karma, because no matter who you point it at, nothing good can come of the idea of collective karma. And that's what I was saying in my piece that this author just completely blows over and doesn't even mention. The rest of the paper is about how convert American Buddhism, which is Buddhism in America practiced by people like me who were not born into it, not ethnically born into it, has been traditionally left-leaning in its politics, but is now being corrupted. I'm editorializing a little bit by saying corrupted because I don't know if the author actually uses that word, but the tone is such that it's unmistakable that this author is saying it's being corrupted by conservative and right-wing forces, of which I am one, and that's why I'm cited so often in the paper. The author calls me a reactionary centrist, which apparently is a centrist, a politically centrist person who punches left. That's my left. I don't know how that's coming out on the screen. Which means criticizes leftist political stuff. Now, this is a pretty trendy idea among some people within American Buddhism today, that Buddhism should be politically lefty, and it's being kind of corrupted by the right wing and conservatives and stuff. But what the author fails to point out is that this kind of leftistness, I don't know, that's not the word I want to use, but the lefty leanings of American Buddhism are an anomaly among Buddhists worldwide. Buddhists outside of American convert Buddhism are generally pretty politically conservative. And this is something I found out much to my surprise when I lived in Japan, especially from my own teacher, who was pretty much of a political conservative, whereas my American teacher had been kind of a, well, actually not kind of, but generally very much a leftist in his politics. And to find out that there were conservative Buddhists was surprising to me. But it makes perfect sense that Buddhists outside of America would be conservatives, because conservatives are generally people who want to conserve traditions of the past, and religious people are people who want to conserve traditions of the past. So it aligns very much, and so you would expect for religious people to be conservative. I mean, it's the same way with Jews, Christians, and Muslims in America, probably in Europe too. You normally tend to think of them as politically conservative. I know there are leftists, Jews, Christians, and Muslims in America and Europe. Of course there are. But the majority you tend to think of as kind of conservative-leaning people. That's the general image. Same with Buddhism outside of this sort of American bubble. And the reason that leftist politics dominates among American Buddhists is easy to explain. Because it's because of the way Buddhism came to America. It appeared in America basically in the 60s. I know there were Buddhists here before that, but it didn't really, take off until the 60s. And it took off among the hippie generation, the baby boomers who were born in the decade and a half or so after World War II, who were rejecting the conservative values of the previous generation. So to be a Buddhist in America in the 60s and 70s was to reject tradition. And furthermore, Buddhism first became popular in the big coastal cities in America, like San Francisco, Los Angeles here, and New York, places that are typically thought of as being pretty left-leaning in their politics. So you would expect a lot of left-leaning people to come into it, and that was the first people to embrace Buddhism in America. So this is why it is pretty lefty, even today. But as American Buddhism has grown and kind of left that bubble of baby boomers from the coastal cities, or baby boomer / people from the coastal cities, it's being embraced by more and more people from the so-called flyover states, which is the pejorative that people from places like Los Angeles call people like me from places like Ohio, that they just fly over to get somewhere else. And those people are generally more conservative. So as Buddhism continues to be embraced by people outside of that, coastal bubble of baby boomers, and as it becomes more of a tradition and less of a novelty, I would expect the conservatism of Buddhism in America to increase. So this movement that the author of this paper seems so distressed by, I think is something that we're all going to have to get used to, because I think this is the direction it's generally going to go in the future. And one of the really bad ideas that's embraced by a lot of American Buddhists is that left-leaning politics is more true to what Buddhism is all about than conservative politics. After all, Buddhists are for saving all beings and spreading loving kindness around the world, and isn't that what leftists, are all about? I used to think this way myself, so what I'm about to say is something it took me quite a while to come to terms with, and so I kind of expect to get some pushback from it in the comments and so on, but I'm going to say it anyway. The idea that only leftists or liberals care about saving all beings and spreading loving kindness is just wrong. And one of the ways that I think is a good example of how this plays out would be contrasting liberal and conservative views about things like military spending and advanced weapon testing. So a leftist, like I used to be, tends to think that if you are anti-war, you're going to be against military spending and against weapons testing. I used to have this button you can see on some of the pictures, old pictures of Zero Defects, that says nuclear freeze on it. So, if you want to know my bona fides or whatever in having this view. So if you're anti-war, you're going to be against these things. And anybody who is for increased military spending or advanced weapon testing must be, therefore, pro-war. Well, that's not really the case. There's a lot of conservatives who are in favor of increased military spending and advanced weapons testing because they are anti-war. Because they believe that the best way to prevent war is to have a strong military, and that without a strong military, you're inviting war to happen. So to be anti-war, you should be in favor of those things. And I'm not trying to make a point about which side is right or wrong on this issue. I just think it's a good issue as one where you can see the contrast. And I think the important point I want to make here is that it's not a good idea to automatically attribute bad motivations or bad intentions to people that you disagree with, because they might not have bad intentions. And I say this because I caused myself a lot of pain and anguish and suffering unnecessarily by attributing bad intention to people that I disagreed with. And now that I've given up doing that, I feel better about people. And I can communicate with people I disagree with a lot more easily and clearly when I don't immediately assume that they have bad intentions. Because if you immediately assume somebody has bad intentions, then of course you're just against them, and there's nothing they can say can possibly have any merit. But if you actually listen to people as to why they have the views that they have, then maybe you can understand where your common aims are and do something, in regard to achieving those common aims. And the other thing is a kind of a Buddhist metaphysical way of looking at things, which is that we are all part of one thing. We all spring from the same source, no matter whether you're Stalin or Nixon, I don't know, to take some extreme examples. You're coming from the same source. And because you come from the same source, you're actually part of the same thing. The way I like to think of it is that we're like a jigsaw puzzle that's been broken to pieces and scattered, and each little piece of the puzzle thinks it's got its own autonomy and its own, thing that it wants to fight for or whatever. But the only way for the big picture to ever come together is for those puzzle pieces to find a way to fit with each other. So that's my heartwarming little message I want to leave you with today. So if you enjoyed that, or even if you didn't enjoy that, and you want to support me, you can go to the URL you're seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. There you will find links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts. Those are my main ways of making a living, and I really appreciate your support that you send me all the time, some of you who send me that. But as always, this is offered for free, so you don't gotta send money if you don't want to send money. So we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Ziggy, did you poop on the rug today? You did poop on the rug today. I think it's because your food made you have kind of a little stomach problem, so I'm sorry, and I'm not mad at you. But you should ask me to go out when that happens, okay? Because I will always take you out. Okay. Thanks, Ziggy. Thank you for your understanding.